It's only an interim deal, but many hail it as a seminal moment. The Iranian foreign minister returning home to a hero's welcome this Monday after signing in Geneva with nuclear negotiators. Already, Tehran announcing the release by Washington, it says, of $8 billion in frozen assets. High hopes that a normalization of ties will mean an end to sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy. We're not there yet, warns the U.S. Secretary of State. True, getting Washington and Tehran to agree on anything is a major deal. Not everyone, though, is thrilled.
In Geneva last night is not a historic agreement. It's a historic mistake.
So is it a historic mistake or a landmark deal? With us in the France 24 debate, Rouzbeh Parsi, senior lecturer at Lund University in Sweden. Happy you're in the French capital today. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
Also with us, the former French ambassador to Tehran, François Picard. Thank you for joining us again. And we welcome back from Tel Aviv, Avi Posner, former Israeli ambassador to France. Thanks for joining us. As we said at the top, a hero's return for the... As we said at the top, a hero's return for the Iranian delegation in Tehran this Monday. More with Thomas Waterhouse.
Hailed as a hero, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif was greeted by thousands of Iranians at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran. Clutching flags and photos of their president, jubilant crowds celebrated the homecoming of the negotiating team, fresh from striking an historic deal in Geneva.
It's just like coming to salute the soldiers who fought for the country and the people. It's like they've gone to war and now they're coming back because they want to prove to the world that we're not warmongers.
For ordinary Iranians, news of the breakthrough was not only a moment of joy, but also of relief. There is now hope that lives made miserable by crippling Western sanctions might now improve.
Most sanctions against Iran were hitting the economy. What Zarif did leads to the release of some Iranian assets. I think everything's going to get better.
The deal was struck after marathon talks between Iran and the P5+1 powers. Iran agreed to suspend enriching uranium beyond levels required in its power stations for the next 6 months, in return for a partial lifting of sanctions to the tune of €5 billion. Back home, Zarif wasted no time, broadcasting live to the nation direct from the airport that the deal would be implemented quickly.
In a few weeks, maybe before the end of the year, we may start the first phase. We are not supposed to do this in too many steps, but some measures will have priority over the others.
As his car drove away, swamped by his admirers, a bigger task still awaits Zarif. The negotiating of a longer-lasting and more comprehensive deal once this 6-month accord has expired.
François Picard, as we said at the top, it's just an interim deal. Is this, though, a seminal moment for the region?
Yes, it is. It is a, well, I said, technically speaking, it's a rather small step, in fact. But politically speaking, it's a huge step towards, normalization of Iran's relations with the outer world and possibly for, détente in the region, in the whole Middle East. So it's an immense progress. When we have been waiting for such an agreement for almost 10 years, it's an immense relief to see this agreement.
Including when you were still ambassador in Tehran.
Absolutely, and we could have reached such an agreement, in fact, in 2005 and 2004, 2005. We missed the goal, we missed the target. Perhaps not for a big distance, but we missed it. And then it took another 8 years to be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Because if everybody knew, in fact, what should be the content of the agreement. Reading the agreement, there's no surprise for the specialists.
So this agreement is the same as the one that you almost signed back then?
No. We had not reached such a point. But the main elements, freezing the uranium enrichment capacity, rolling back perhaps on some points like the stockpile of uranium, controlling the development of Iraq. This was in the heads of the negotiators. Everybody knew that this would be part of the final of the interim deal for the moment.
Avi Posner, we're hearing two signals out of Israel. On the one hand, of course, those words we heard at the top of the program from the Prime Minister saying that it's a historic mistake. On the other hand, the stock market, which has been up in Israel, they believe that things could be on the upside. Ultimately, is this a watershed moment for the region?
Look, I don't want to be a party spoiler, but when Israel Prime Minister says that it is a historical mistake, you have just to have a look at the reception that Foreign Minister Zarif got when he returned to Tehran. He was welcomed as a hero, as somebody who brought victory to Iran. And indeed, I believe that this deal is a very good deal for Iran. It is a very bad deal for Iran's neighbor, for the region, for Europe, for the world, because for the first time now, officially, Iran has been allowed to enrich uranium. It is true only to a level of 3.5%, but Iran has such sophisticated centrifuge that in a matter to 6, 8, or 10 weeks, they can enrich to a degree of 90%, which is the threshold of an atomic bomb. And this is a dangerous step taken, and you can see that the joy in the streets of Tehran contrasts with the worries in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, because we know the true nature of the Iranian regime, which has as one of its main aim is the destruction of the state of Israel. And so we do not greet this agreement with joy, on the contrary, with a lot of worry. And we said already that we are not going to be bound by this agreement. And this implies that for us, all options remain on the table.
Yeah, but you won't go it alone if you decide to strike at Iran the way you did at Iraq in 1983.
Look, I don't want to speculate about military operations. I just can tell you that we will give a try, of course, for the diplomatic effort. And we are sending now a team of diplomatic and a nuclear expert to Washington in order to talk with the American administration on how to get about, if it is possible, a permanent agreement which would roll back Iran's capabilities and would prevent further enrichment of uranium.
All right, so you're sending a team.
Is achievable.
You're sending a team. You're saying to Washington.
I didn't hear you.
I was just saying you're sending a team to Washington. Let me just bring in Ruzbeh Parsi on this. Ruzbeh, you heard Avi Posner say 5% enrichment, yes, but nothing's to prevent Iran from then developing the bomb very fast.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the notion that we will try and figure out whether it's a good deal or a bad deal by seeing the other side being happy or not being happy, as if all Iranians were unhappy, then it's a good deal, well, then their politicians would not be able to sell it at home at all. Secondly, you have hardliners in Tehran who think this was a very bad deal for Iran. So if the ambassador wants to find people who are dissatisfied, you can find them in Iran as well. To the point, Iran has had enrichment since 2003. Whether you can allow it or not is not a question. That's a delusional question for the simple reason that you have no force or ability to roll it back to zero. There is no negotiated settlement to be had where there will be no enrichment in Iran. You cannot negotiate yourself to that. So to claim that you can have a diplomatic track that leads to zero enrichment in Iran is not possible. Then you will have to go for the military solution, which is not a solution because just about everyone who has looked at any military scenario will tell you that you can at best roll it back for 2 years and then the Iranians will rebuild it. And when they rebuild it, they will definitely have the goal of a nuclear weapon. At the moment, they could do everything that the Israeli ambassador claims that this deal allows them. They can do that before the deal. So why would that be a particular danger after the deal? And in any case, this deal says that Iran should ship out quite a lot of its stockpiles by reconverting them to something that cannot be used to enrich to weaponized level. So the deal actually gets us quite far. And since it's an interim deal, it's not the final agreement. There will be further steps to be taken where we can find more safeguards to make sure that Iran does not have a secret weapons program.
All right, an interim deal. And of course, it's not just the Iranians that are crying victory coming out of those talks in Geneva.
This is an important moment, an encouraging moment in our relations with Iran and in our efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation in the world.
Iran has agreed to give up nuclear weapons. It's clear. Regarding civilian nuclear energy, like we've always said, that can advance. But for nuclear weapons, that's a no.
The Saudis, by the way, this Monday, breaking a 24-hour silence with a written statement on those nuclear talks. If there is goodwill, then this agreement could be an initial step towards reaching a comprehensive solution for Iran's nuclear program that leads to the removal of weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons, from the Middle East and Arab Gulf. Your reaction to that reaction, François Picard, on the part of the Saudis?
Well, it's a wise reaction. It's a wise statement. And it shows that the Saudis are careful and they realize that something is happening, and they don't want to be eliminated from what was going to happen, what is going to happen, and this goes frankly in the right direction.
It goes in the right direction, but we know, for instance, that back in September, when President Rouhani went to the United Nations in New York, on the sidelines of it, there were talks with major oil companies and who are dying to get into Iran. We know that some are saying that this could spur a new arms race between the Saudis and the Iranians if the Iranians are back in the game in terms of no longer isolated by sanctions and no longer isolated by the West.
In arms race, no, I don't see it, frankly. One has to realize that, in fact, Iran, contrary to what most people think, has a rather weak defense system, a weak army, and they have practically no planes, and the army is able to defend perhaps the frontiers of Iran, but they are certainly unable to project themselves to any territory. In fact, Iran has not aggressed any country around them since, in the last 200 years, you know. And at the moment, the defense capacities in the Gulf, in the Arab states of the Gulf, are far, far more superior than what you can find in Iran. There's no comparison.
On the issue of oil, how much of a factor has been the pressure of oil companies that want to get back in there into the Iranian market?
Well, I'm sure they want to get back in, but in terms of that would motivate Saudi reluctance or discouraging them discouraging the U.S., I don't think so, because the oil market is much more movable, much more flexible, and it has more oil than most people need at the moment, in any case. So that doesn't really matter. But I think what it points to, though, is that both Israel and Saudi Arabia they don't only have a problem with Iran's nuclear program. They have a problem with Iran, period. It's a question of the strategic balance of the region. So if it wasn't the nuclear program, there would be something else that they would complain about, because they've now had 30 more years where Iran has been in a corner, partly because of its own stumbling and bumbling. And for those 30 years, both Israel and Saudi Arabia have been the foremost allies of the United States. Now, if any kind of normalization takes place, Iran will be back into the game, and they will have to factor that in a different way, and they would prefer not to.
But under the Shah,
yes,
Israel and Iran had close ties.
Absolutely.
So why it's not... You can have close ties if you're Israel with both the U.S. and Iran.
This could be a win-win for Israel as well, absolutely. But the problem is, of course, that Israel has a prime minister who spent the last 20 years predicting an Iranian bomb every other year without ever being right about it. So he's put quite a lot of political capital into the notion that Iran is an existential danger.
Avi Posner?
Yeah, I think that we are ignoring the true nature of the Iranian regime. And I would like only to quote what the Supreme Guide, Khamenei, said only 5 days ago, that Israel is a cancer in the Middle East, and this cancer has to be removed. So this is what we are talking about. We are talking about a dangerous regime, a regime which is a threat and is not a partner but a threat not only to Israel, it is a threat to the Saudi Arabian and to the Kuwaitis and to the Emirates and to Bahrain and to everybody around Iran. And this is the reason why you have had such negative reactions about this deal. The fact that the Saudis produced a written statement of a few lines, cautious statement, it is simply because they are afraid and worried about Iran and they do not dare to speak out their mind, which is not the case for Israel, because we believe that the danger is such that it is important that the world takes notion of what we are facing, what we are potentially facing, and are not deluding themselves into a spring of good relation with a regime which is an extremist regime and does not want any collaboration or any coexistence with Israel.
François Nicolas?
You know, the Khamenei's declaration are unacceptable. It's absolutely evident. It's abhorrent. On the other hand, one has to, if you put yourself in, you transfer yourself in Iran, I mean, and you hear every 2 days that Israel is going to bomb Iran, it makes people nervous, and probably they say things that they should not say, that's for sure.
So what you're saying is that both Netanyahu and the Ayatollah Khamenei have talked themselves into a corner a bit?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, but I also find it interesting that, in the 1980s when Iran was as ideological as it usually states that it is, because today it is not very ideological. It talks that way, but in effect it doesn't really act like that. But in the 1980s there was a much closer confluence between ideology and action. That was actually the decade when Israel was selling Iran arms in its war against Iraq, thinking that it could woo it. So the notion that somehow what the Iranians say is so important tends to only happen when it suits the Israeli hardliners in their depiction of Iran as a super dangerous country that at all costs should be kept at arm's length.
Avi Posner, The Guardian newspaper, among others, reporting this Monday that there have been back-channel discussions between the United States and Iran dating back to the month of March in preparation for the deal that was signed over the weekend. Month of March, if you take a look back, that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was still the president. So in other words, it means that the Supreme Leader was perhaps keen to strike a deal privately, even though publicly he made the statements that you referred to a moment ago.
I am not sure that this information in The Guardian is correct, because it seems strange to me that there were back channels at the time of Ahmadinejad, but no one knows. Back channels, their very nature is that you don't know about them. And what is apparent is that after Rouhani was elected, there was a wind of change, not only in Washington, but also in European capitals, because people want to believe the smiles and the positive attitude of Rouhani. But the true nature of the regime is different. And I would like only to have a remark to what Dr. Parsi said about hardliners in Israel and in Iran. In Israel, it is not only Netanyahu who believes that this is not a good deal, but if you read the Israeli press and you hear the Israeli leaders from all parties, from right to left, going through the center, everybody is extremely worried about what this agreement is going to bring about, and extremely worried that the final or permanent agreement will not be a good agreement, like this present agreement is not a good agreement.
Geneva, by the way, preparing for another upcoming conference. It was announced this Monday. It'll be on Syria. Government and opposition meeting for the first time since the start of the civil war around the same table. January 22nd is the date. The UN and Arab League envoy, Lakhdar Brahimi, leaving open the door to both Iran and Saudi Arabia participating. Francois Nicolot, first of all, the fact that they've reached an agreement, they're all going to sit down at the same table. Did that agreement depend on, first of all, a deal on Iran's nuclear program?
No, frankly, I don't think so. But it's true that there is a change of atmosphere. And the first signal was the Iranian agreement, the agreement with Iran. Now we have a second signal. And so, well, hope is there. I mean, there is a changing of atmosphere. Many things can happen starting from this point. Speaking of the interim agreement, I would like to say something perhaps to alleviate the legitimate concerns of Israel and the Israeli population. The Iranians, it is in Iran's interest to apply faithfully this interim agreement, because if they don't apply it faithfully, there won't be a final agreement. So, frankly, I think we have a chance, because if this agreement is faithfully applied with all the scruples and so on, it will change also the atmosphere. I mean, it will alleviate the fears, it will alleviate the concern. People will realize slowly, but slowly by slowly, that perhaps Iran is not running after the bomb. I mean, and perhaps there is really a chance for a different Middle East. So the next 6 months will be very important. The way the Iranians are going to apply this agreement is very important, and I am faithful in the fact that they will apply it faithfully.
There's going to be an easing of sanctions perhaps within the next month, said the French foreign minister. However, in the United States, it's a different story, Rouzbeh Parsi. You heard Avi Posner say that they're going to be speaking with their friends in Washington about this. We've had people on our some of the viewers who've been weighing in while we've been speaking, saying that the U.S. Congress should not blink. What's going to happen on that score if the European Union, on the one hand, eases sanctions and the U.S. doesn't?
Well, I mean, as the agreement states, both the president of Iran and the president of the United States and the parliaments of both countries have their respective roles. So in a sense, it tacitly acknowledges the fact that they're not in sync. At the moment, the Iranian president and the Iranian parliament are in sync, but the U.S. Congress and the U.S. president are not in sync. So the U.S. president is going to alleviate sanctions where he can, those who are under executive order. But his real struggle, which is both domestic and vis-a-vis the Iranians, is to show that he's credible as a partner in being able to unmake the sanctions that the U.S. Congress have enacted. And at some point, not during these 6 months, but for the final agreement, that is absolutely necessary. And I think he has a hard job in doing that, partly because many people in Congress have a very unrealistic approach and view of what the deal is about and what they can achieve through negotiations. So they seem to think that the notion of negotiations is that Iran surrenders everything. And no one does that in a negotiation. That's not in the nature of a negotiation. And that's the kind of delusion that they're entertaining at the moment. And his job is going to be to educate them that that's not possible unless they want a war. And then they have to come up with they have to come up with the troops and the money to do that.
Avi Posner, how do you get Iran to save face so that there can be a breakthrough and an end to a stalemate between regional powers that's lasted, since 1979, you might say?
Yes, I do believe that the sanctions were highly effective. Those were hard-hitting and biting sanctions, which brought Iran to some kind of negotiations, which they seem to get out victorious of them.
But how do you allow them to save face?
I think it would be, you know what, I think that Iranians are much better negotiators than the Western powers. And the very fact, looked at how they presented this agreement. You can always present an agreement as an enormous victory. It depends on how you do it. This time, the Foreign Minister Zarif came back as a winner to Tehran. It can do the same thing on another negotiation, which could cut a better deal for the Western power, for the Middle East, and indeed for the world.
Final point from you, François Nicolot. how do you make sure that there is a virtuous circle now and that there is a thaw, you might say, in the region of relations?
Yes, obviously. And we have entered a virtuous circle. You mentioned the date of the next Syrian conference on Syria. Again, confident trust, contrarily to what most people say, are not indispensable, are not necessary before an agreement. They are the byproducts of a good agreement faithfully applied. And everything now, I mean, what we're going to enter is this phase, this very important phase of the application, of the implementation of the agreement. And this is where we will be able to see this precious flower and fragile flower, which is confidence, which is trust, will be able at least to blossom. But I am confident on this.
All right, and on that note, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you, Ambassador Nicolo. I want to thank Rouzbeh Parsi, Avi Posner for joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.